And folks, good morning. Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
I think, it's a great pleasure to see the sort of energy in the room this morning, because I think we're here to talk about something which is near and dear to all of us. But we're here to talk about something which goes beyond an event. We're here to talk about creating and developing a movement that can take us from where we are today as a set of Caribbean nations to where we would like to get to tomorrow as a Caribbean civilization. Let me begin by thanking Kevin Howell for the extraordinary work that he has done in putting this together. And let me take this opportunity as well to thank our sponsors, BNY Mellon, COCO-MAT, New York City Small Business Services, the Caribbean Chamber of Industry and Commerce, Emigrant Mortgage, and a couple of others whom my failing eyesight doesn't allow me to read, but we've certainly mentioned them. We very much appreciate your support to this type of event. It's really important to us, and we thank you for it. When I met Kevin, I was really impressed with the level of dynamism that he showed. And I wanted to give support to this movement based on the vision that he had in terms of how we can take the Caribbean forward. And it reminded me of some of the challenges we have to overcome in the Caribbean and what it is we need to be doing to bring ourselves together to overcome these things. Just over 10 years ago, Hurricane Ivan struck my island of Grenada, and it caused devastation worth about 200% of GDP. And I mention this because it destroyed Grenada's main economic pillars, and we had to find a way to build again and to build back better, and to build a new set of industries, to build a new economic base. And what we quickly found is that we didn't have the financial architecture, the banking arrangements that would allow us to diversify the economy and to move into some new areas as we needed to. And so we set up something called the Grenada Enterprise Alliance with a view to attracting venture capital, with a view to encouraging enterprise, bringing people together, and very much, with the theme of this conference, we were basically trying to accelerate growth and create for the global connections for a small country like Grenada. And we're all here under this theme of accelerating growth and making global connections. And it's important not just because of the businesses that we have and that we're trying to grow, but also because we want to create the right enabling environment for our countries. And we want to be able to bequeath to those who come after us a much better society. We want to be able to bequeath to them a much better civilization. We have something now called the Caribbean Single Market and Economy. And many of the ideas for this came out of something which started many decades before, called the Caribbean Federation. And despite all of our efforts as Caribbean to come together, even something like the CSME, we still find that we have huge disadvantages in terms of transportation, inter-island transportation, LIAT, for example, and sea transportation, things that we need to overcome. And so we need to find ways to do these things so that we can ensure that business can be done. A number of our countries are moving higher up the list on the IFC's Doing Business report. And so there's some bright spots beginning to happen. So while we try to move in this particular direction, we're also here to do deals. We don't just want to talk about things theoretically, we want to have a chance, as Dr. Nelson said, to be able to engage with each other and to do deals. I'd just like to very quickly set some context to this, and I'd ask you to indulge me, because I think what we're doing here today has so many parallels with what's happening in the United Nations, where we've just been meeting this week. And as many of you know, since 2000, a set of Millennium Development Goals were developed, and this September, the entire world agreed to 17 new sets, a set of new goals called the Sustainable Development Goals, to take us further forward. 20 years ago, 30 years ago, one of the biggest challenges we had was that people would look to Mother Africa and talk about a set of difficulties and challenges we had with growth, poverty reduction, and so on. And what we find today with things like the Millennium Development Goals is that African countries, we have some of the fastest growing economies coming from the African continent. I'm talking about Tanzania, Rwanda, Cote d'Ivoire, Ethiopia, and a number of other countries that have been showing very, very fast growth. And this is actually quite good for us in the Caribbean, because as part of the African diaspora, it sends out a very strong signal that we in the region and we as a people mean business, that we can do business, and that we can change the narrative and change the story of who we are as a people and where we see our future going. Now, in Africa, one of the key things that has contributed to this growth has been the development of mobile phone technologies. And whereas in the 1950s, you needed a room about the size of this section over here for a supercomputer, we can basically do most of that on this phone here today. And do you know that in the Caribbean, we have some of the highest rates of mobile phone penetrations anywhere in the world? And this is something on which we need to build. And we see that with this type of development, Caribbean companies are growing, they're becoming much more global. Just before the economic crash, COCO was doing deals in France. A company like Sandals has become a global brand name in terms of tourism. And we see here, right here in the United States, that certainly the African American community has risen to the forefront in terms of what they've been able to achieve in areas such as what I call the creative industries and in other areas. And so I say that to also make the point that we will be talking about fashion later on today, but we also need to be thinking about the creative industries. The film 12 Years a Slave, for example, received an Oscar award. And 12 Years a Slave was actually directed by someone of Caribbean descent, which many of you may know, Steve McQueen, happens to come from Grenada. His family came from Grenada. I thought I should mention that. But the same way that we have a president in the United States that is changing perceptions, same way we have a president who's standing on the shoulders of the civil rights movement, the same way that we are standing on the shoulders of others who've gone forward to make many, many advances in business. And it's the same way that we must leave that platform for those who follow. So I want to congratulate Kevin in setting up in pulling all of this together. I want to congratulate you also for the setting in which we're meeting today. I think it gives a sense of where we're going and where we're headed. And we have a number of excellent speakers in a whole range of industries. I've mentioned fashion and the creative industries, but we're going to be touching on food and beverage, business process outsourcing, property, and finance. And we need to be talking about finance in terms of the nexus between innovation, entrepreneurship, and finance. And let me just sort of round off this presentation to you this morning with a couple of thoughts on this. Silicon Valley has been responsible for creating a new industry around ICT, where industries have come and they've clustered together. It created a whole new wave of wealth creation, roughly $1 trillion for a market of 1 billion people. today we have a new paradigm, which we're not going to be talking about, but it's something to think about as we move forward, and that is in energy sector. And energy is expected to be a $6 trillion market for about 4 billion people, rising to 7 billion in the next 20, 30 years. These industries are clustering. Silicon Valley is a cluster. Hollywood is a cluster. Detroit is a cluster. Around the world, we're seeing industries clustering, and this is where we get a level of competition, and where we get innovation, and where we get businesses that become globally outstanding. And that's where we want to be as a set of Caribbean countries. So we need to think about our Caribbean countries not as places competing against each other, but as an interlinkage of clustered industries supporting each other, feeding into each other, and having a dynamic ecosystem of relationships amongst each other. So we have some exciting things that we're going to be talking about today. We've got a great set of speakers. I want us to think about this process today, as I said, not as an event, but as a movement to take us forward. Let us build this movement for Go Caribbean. Let us have more and more people coming to these meetings. And let us create the type of exciting economic clusters that can make the Caribbean islands stand out on the global stage, because that in turn will help lift the competitiveness of our entrepreneurs. And let us ensure that that is tightly intertwined with the financial services community. I thank you, and Kevin, I thank you for everything you've done today.
Thank you, Ambassador. Indeed, it is a movement.